Well, y'all, this is a video I have looked forward to recording for a long time. I have here in my hand a binding contract with the federal government promising to keep their grubby paws off of forced reset triggers. If you're like me, you've never seen a settlement go down. You've never seen a lawsuit in this way. So there's a lot about this that's a bit confusing and that I was learning as we went through this process for the first time. So if you're in that boat, I wanted to kind of record a video that now that the dust has settled, just kind of explain to everybody what we're looking at, how this works, why it works the way that it works, and what's next for you if you are one of those who the ATF has yet to return your trigger. So let's dive into it. So first off, let's back up a little bit and set the stage just slightly. Right? So the ATF started going after forced reset triggers because they said that forced reset triggers are a machine gun. We filed a lawsuit saying that they were overstepping their statutory bounds, that the ATF can't just rewrite the federal definition of machine gun, which Congress placed in statute. The ATF can't just rewrite that and then ban triggers based on their own definition. Right? They're overstepping their bounds. So I want to emphasize that because this was never a Second Amendment case. This was never a case where we were saying that forced reset triggers are covered by the Second Amendment. Now, that may be true, but that's not what the lawsuit said. The lawsuit was about agency power because Joe Biden's ATF was way overstepping and was bypassing Congress to try to ban things that they had never banned. And we saw that. I mean, we know that was a major strategy in the Biden Department of Justice and the Biden ATF. They went after bump stocks. They went after home-built firearms. They went after pistol braces. They went after private firearm sales. And they went after forced reset triggers. But forced reset triggers were a little bit different because they didn't go through the transparent rulemaking process. I say transparent, but it is a process that's governed by the Administrative Procedures Act. You create a rule, there's a comment period, the public gets a chance to weigh in. That didn't happen with forced reset triggers. They just decided in their own little creepy back rooms, you know what, we think these are machine guns. We're going to enforce it as such. So there was never an official rule to repeal. They just went out and they just did it. To combat that and to stand up for NAGR's members that had triggers that were taken from them, we filed a lawsuit in 2023 saying, no, you've overstepped your bounds. This is the statutory definition of a machine gun. This is how a forced reset trigger works. They are not the same thing. You cannot do this. You were overstepping. And we won, right? We won final judgment at the district court. We brought the lawsuit in the Northern District of Texas, which is an extremely friendly venue for gun rights issues. And we won. We won final judgment, and Judge Reed O'Connor said, yes, the ATF has overstepped. Yes, this is not a statutory machine gun. And the ATF has to send remedial letters saying, oh, we got it wrong, and you have to return to NAGR members their triggers. Now, part of the reason Judge O'Connor said that was because the Supreme Court had just ruled in the bump stock case, the Cargill case, where they said, again, you can't rewrite the definition of machine gun and then enforce it to ban things that Congress never banned, right? Same issue, just copy-paste from bump stocks to forced reset triggers. So because of that, it made it a really easy win at the district court. And it was on the merits. It was final judgment. So if the ATF decided not to fight it then, that would have been full and complete victory. The reason it was only NAGR members that would get their triggers back is because he's only giving relief for the parties in question. That's kind of how lawsuits work, especially lawsuits of this nature, right? Unfortunately, though, the Biden ATF did fight back. The Biden ATF appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They said, no, we want to keep coming after triggers, so please undo what Judge O'Connor did. And they didn't just do that. They also refused and delayed compliance with the relief that Judge O'Connor ordered. We talked to many of our members who were calling us and emailing us saying, we tried to get our triggers back and the ATF is just, dragging their feet about it or outright refusing or saying that they don't have to give them back to us. And that wasn't right. So we ended up actually filing a motion for contempt with Judge O'Connor, said that the ATF is not meeting their obligations or as ordered by you in your final judgment ruling and subsequent rulings as well. So while all of that's pending, right, the Fifth Circuit appeal is pending where the ATF is trying to get rid of Judge O'Connor's final judgment ruling. That's going really well. We expect to win there because the Fifth Circuit also got Cargill correct. And then Donald Trump gets elected. And with the Trump administration, the leadership at the Department of Justice changes. The leadership at the ATF changes as well. Now you have a completely different administration, and this administration was willing to talk about laying down their arms when it came to triggers. So a few weeks ago, the talks began in earnest, and it was hard not to talk about it, y'all. You're not supposed to talk about settlement agreements. Any lawyer who's been through that process will tell you that. You've got to keep that conversation to the actual parties. And then you talk about it after the paper is signed. So I was excited because this was extremely promising, but I couldn't tell you all about it. So this is my chance to fill you in kind of on how all of that went down. Now, there were 3 lawsuits involved in the settlement discussions, right? There was NAGR's lawsuit, which was the foundational lawsuit. This was the one where a court had said the ATF's underlying determination of forced reset triggers as machine guns is unlawful. That's the one that everything else was based on. But there were 2 other lawsuits involving Lawrence DeMonico and our friends at Rare Breed Triggers because it was based on our win that they were trying to get rid of their own lawsuits where the ATF is coming after them for manufacturing, selling, and distributing, right? So in the settlement agreement, you're going to see a lot of provisions that are not necessarily relevant to NAGR members and to us because they're part of those other lawsuits. I'm approaching this from a broad perspective because I just want to explain the process of the settlement. But if you're a little bit confused by some of what you're seeing there, that's what that's about. All right, so that's the background. So how did this work? What are you seeing when you're reading this settlement agreement? Well, what you're reading is a binding contract between the National Association for Gun Rights, the other plaintiffs, and the Department of Justice. But it's not just the Department of Justice. It's not just President Trump. This is a binding contract between us and the federal government, and this is binding even after Trump leaves office, and it will be binding even if, God forbid, we get a Gavin Newsom presidency, and the ATF then wants to go after forced reset triggers again. Then what do? We say, you signed a contract, because they did sign a contract, and we're going to sue for the enforcement of that contract if they violate it. So it is a binding contract. It is binding beyond the current administration. And if we have to bring a lawsuit to enforce it, we will do so in the Northern District of Texas. That is also in here. The venue, if we have to bring litigation to enforce this contract, will be in the Northern District of Texas. That, again, is one of the friendliest courts in the entire country for gun rights issues. We may actually even get Judge O'Connor again. I want to also make the point that this actually expands on what Judge O'Connor did. Everything that Judge O'Connor ruled, FRTs are not machine guns. NAGR members have to get their triggers back. All of that is still in place. But it didn't just solidify and set in stone Judge O'Connor's ruling. It also expanded the net of protection and relief beyond NAGR members. Now with this type of lawsuit, only the parties, and that would include our members and the members of Texas Gun Rights who were a party to this lawsuit, they would get their triggers back under Judge O'Connor's order. But under the settlement, every law-abiding American who had a trigger seized or who was forced to surrender a trigger gets it back. And NAGR has the right to sue to enforce that. And that's a really big thing. That was not something, actually, that was in the original draft. That was something that we fought to add. Because we've said from day one that there shouldn't be 2 classes of gun owners. And your protection for your gun rights shouldn't rely on whether or not you're a member of a certain organization or not. We want to make sure everybody got their triggers back. Finally, the other thing that I really want to point out here is that they have promised not to come after triggers again. Now, if you read their language, they're not saying, oh, we were wrong, Judge O'Connor was right, forced reset triggers are not machine guns, and we stepped out. No. The ATF still has to save some face. Okay, fine. I want y'all to look at the actual results. They've promised not to use federal statute in any way, shape, or form to come after triggers again. The results of that are that triggers are protected. The results of that are that they're going to honor what Judge O'Connor said in his ruling, The FRTs are not, under current law, machine guns. And that's a win, y'all. That is the win that we wanted. We wanted the ATF to lay down their arms. We wanted them to stop fighting our district court win. And we wanted them to return everybody's triggers. They have agreed to all of those things in this settlement, and that is why I am so excited to tell you about it today. Now, one thing you may be wondering, and this is a fair question, is why we didn't appeal. Couldn't we have gotten a better precedent if we had taken it to the Fifth Circuit and maybe on to the Supreme Court? And the answer to that is not necessarily and even probably not, because there are two things that the Fifth Circuit would have been ruling on. One is the issue. Are FRTs machine guns under the federal statute? We think they probably would have gotten that one right. They got Cargill right. We also have the Supreme Court's Cargill precedent. Probably that would have been right. But we wouldn't have been a bit surprised if they had watered down the relief ordered for trigger owners that are our members, right? That is one thing that we were actually worried about. If the Fifth Circuit watered down the relief that the ATF was forced to provide, that would not have been a win. By settling, we've solidified the district court win and even expanded it. That's not something we would have looked to come from the Fifth Circuit ruling if we had gotten it. Now, would we have gotten a Supreme Court win? Probably not. Again, the Supreme Court already ruled on this issue of agency power, and if they can expand the definition of machine gun to include items that are not currently under that definition, they already addressed that in the Cargill ruling. They said, no, you can't. That's why we got the wins that we've already gotten. That's why we have the settlement today. If we had taken it back to the Supreme Court, best case scenario, they don't grant cert. They say, we've already addressed this. We don't need to weigh in again. Worst case scenario, they take the case, they water down the Cargill precedent, or they give us a Vanderstock type ruling, that they get it wrong, right? We can't count on what the Supreme Court's going to do. We can't even count on what the Fifth Circuit's going to do. What we can count on is that we can solidify the absolute win we already got and force the ATF to abide by it. That is final victory. That is complete victory. That is comprehensive victory, and that is what we got. Now, when the ATF agrees to not come after triggers again, and they agree to it in a formal contract that we then can enforce in the Northern District of Texas, that's about as close to a guarantee as is possible in this fallen world. Another question that some people might have is, what about as trigger technology develops, or if there's a different type of trigger that comes out, if someone invents another one under the current settlement, that wouldn't be covered. Well, but that wouldn't have been covered under our original lawsuit either. Remember? Because this is not about whether or not the Second Amendment protects triggers. This was about whether or not the ATF had a right to classify them as machine guns and then ban them accordingly. So again, what was the original lawsuit about? The original lawsuit's about what is a machine gun under current federal statute, what is a forced reset trigger, and are they the same thing? So as our lawyer said actually just this morning, you can only win the lawsuit that you file, right? And this was a very specific lawsuit over a very specific set of technology, and so the settlement only addresses that. So any other technology, it's going to have to be litigated on its own merits. So now, what's next? Where do we stand currently? Well, right now we're waiting for the ATF to confirm how trigger owners can reclaim their seized or surrendered triggers. They said they would give us some specifics on that. We are waiting to confirm that, and we will let you know as soon as we have those specifics. And I want to be very clear about this, regardless of your membership status, if you are a law-abiding gun owner, you have no charges, you're not under indictment for anything unrelated to FRTs, and that's looped into it. The only thing that the ATF has on you is that you owned an FRT and they came and took it away from you, and they won't give you your trigger back. Let us know. There's a link to an email in the description below where you can contact our team. Let us know what's happening, and we'll see what we can do. Because, again, we have tools in the toolbox now, thanks to the settlement, to help with situations of that nature. I want to say also a word of thanks to our stellar legal team. The team at Dillon Law Group has been absolutely outstanding. It's thanks to their excellence that we got all of the wins in the lower courts initially, and then they were able to bring the ATF to the table and walk away with an absolute win for FRT owners nationwide. So just want to say thank you to them and thank you to the members of the National Association for Gun Rights. This is a lawsuit that no other gun group would touch. And every single one of you stood by us and stood up to the ATF, and you're walking away with a win. This is a good day for us. It's a good day for you, and we are so grateful to you for standing with us in this fight against the ATF. Now, if you'd like to contribute to our legal war chest so that we can keep filing those challenges and bringing home the legal wins, there's also a link in the description where you can do that. Once again, thanks so much, and stay tuned for what's next.